Welcome to the Industrial IoT Spotlight, your number one spot for insight from industrial IoT thought leaders who are transforming businesses today. With your host, Eric Walenza.
Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight. I'm joined again by Carlos Villanueva. Carlos, again, is the head of market intelligence and strategic partnerships with BICS. In our last discussion with Carlos, we spoke about BICS, the connectivity solution provider for remote or roaming services for IoT devices globally. We're now going to deep dive into the technology behind BICS. Carlos, maybe as a primer, how does roaming for IoT devices differ from roaming for, let's say, people's devices, for smartphones?
Yeah, but basically, it will depend on the use case and the device, of course. As you know, there are many devices today that are more consumer-oriented. Those devices that are consumer-oriented, of course, there is less mobility, and the amount of data that they are going to transmit is, I would say, pretty low. For those devices, basically, the need of roaming is a bit, let's say, less, because they will be like doing permanent roaming, right? They will be more stationary in places, cities, etc., or industries, factories, etc. When it comes to mobile devices, where basically they will, of course, require mobility and connectivity. Again, it will depend on the use case, because if we look at how our data roamer today is consuming social networks or social media, video streaming with their roaming, compared to, let's say, a connected car that is providing TV streaming services, then you will think that it's mostly the same, because the amount of data that they will require will be considerable. So again, it will depend on the use case. But if you look at how it will be consumed, of course, the devices that are going to be embedded into the different use cases will determine what would be the differences. If you look at, for example, industrial Internet of Things, right? So where the sensors are going to be sending data to specific modems, and those modems probably will be sending data back to a data center. So those devices probably will be sending a considerable amount of data. So again, from my perspective, one is, of course, consumer-oriented. I will be more consumer applications, let's say, oriented, while the other one, the IoT, will be definitely based specifically on use cases, and depending, again, on the use case, will be the difference between the consumer roaming versus the IoT roaming. But definitely, there will be some applications where, let's say, the IoT case will be pretty similar to the consumer one. So when it comes to functionality, both might work the same way, meaning when you roam, for example, and you travel with your smartphone to, let's say, Asia or US or Europe, basically you are consuming data through, as I say, through your email or social media or video streaming, etc. So those devices that are probably manufactured in China that are going to be sent to US, Africa, Middle East, are going to be used for specific purposes. It could be, for example, if you send a SIM card inside a tablet, probably the tablet will have the same consumption as the normal roaming. But if you send the SIM card inside of a device that is going to be in a container traveling across the world, probably the amount of data is going to differ. What is true, and what is very clear, and that what we see in the industry, is that there are many applications where being connected, always connected, is a must. In the consumer, let's say, consumer roaming, if I might call it like that, is not, let's say, critical oriented as some of the IoT applications. Why? Because, for example, in the tracking, in the remote monitoring or tracking systems, many of the service providers are asking to be covered not only by mobile connectivity or mobile roaming, but also by satellite, for example, or other type of connectivity. It means that they will need the device to be always connected no matter where they are. So they cannot really afford to have no connectivity or no signal in some parts of the world. So then it becomes much more interesting because it's not only about providing national connectivity or global connectivity to a smartphone, but how do you guarantee that device is going to be always connected? How do you make sure that the different connectivity methods would be all working together to satisfy the demand of the enterprise? There is where I see the difference in the use case and how connectivity will really play a role according to the use case.
Yeah, gotcha. And then I suppose use case by use case, as you mentioned, the requirements are going to vary dramatically, right? So you could be potentially streaming video at the upper spectrum, but you could also be sending, one piece of data every 6 hours, every 12 hours, just reporting, I'm here, door has not been opened, et cetera. The underlying technology, it sounds like, is the same for both situations, but it's that the cost structure for the end user, the cost structure is then based on data usage, or how does this look like from a cost perspective when you can have these very dramatic differences in the amount of data and the frequency of data being sent?
Yeah. It's the service model is different because it's not only about traffic, right? It's not only about megabytes or gigabytes, etc. It's about the service that is provided to the end user or to the enterprise, if it is industrial or if it is consumer. So in the industrial case, they won't be really looking after the megabytes, because what they need is to guarantee connectivity always on. So they can really build a use case necessary to satisfy the needs of the industry vertical industry. So it's less traffic oriented, I would say, and it will depend on the application. You are right. For example, if we look at meters, right, smart meters, of course, the amount of data that are going to be transmitting is much more, it's lower than other applications. So again, depending on the use case and who will be the end user, I would say, if it is consumer of enterprise, is how they will be sensitive to the price per megabyte, or price per giga, etc. It's how sensitive it is to you, the fact that connectivity is a must and it has to be high quality and reliable. If that happens, even if it is just pieces of data being sent per day, then the monetization model will be different, right? So compared to a non-critical application that is sending the same pieces of data per day, where connectivity might not be a high value building block. So it will depend again on the use case. It will depend on the industry, let's say on the vertical industry, but it also will depend on how connectivity plays a role in the in delivering and deploying the final solution towards the enterprises. What we see, for example, in the market is that many of the different service providers and players, they are looking for cheap connectivity because they do not consider sometimes connectivity as a high value in the IoT value chain due to the application, right? Due to the use case. But I will say that even for those cases, having reliable connectivity is a must. And I'm gonna tell you. I would like to explain you why it's really that connectivity matters, right? Because if we look at the applications and we look at the enterprises that are going to be, let's say, using those devices, the enterprises are basically trying to transform their business, right? So they are trying to connect equipment, processes, and systems. But as you know, the different enterprises are not, let's say, experienced on the different IoT building blocks. So they just need network agnostic and global mobile connectivity, right? So they need to have and efficient control and management of thousands of millions of connected devices. And they need to integrate the mobile connectivity and the networks to their backup systems. So then they can really monetize their use case and the mobile connectivity. So if they don't have these, let's say, 4 building blocks, basic building blocks, it's pretty difficult that the enterprise can really succeed on building their end-to-end solutions. Why? Because as I previously said, they need to focus on the monetization of the IoT services, not really into the connectivity piece. So the connectivity piece must be there to be always reliable for any use case that they need to deploy.
Yeah, and I guess as a consumer, when I'm roaming, I don't need much more in terms of a user interface to tell me if my phone is on, except for to track the bars, right? How many bars do I have? Can I make a phone call? Maybe a text message is nice if I'm out of money or out of a roaming zone to inform me. But for industrial, you actually need to be able to visualize this and present it in reports. Is this done by third parties, or to what extent does BICS kind of follow the data stream and visualize this or report this out to companies?
We can do it ourselves when it comes to connectivity. I mean, we manage the connectivity of the different devices. But if they, for example, they would like to have more, let's say, advanced analytics on the use case and the service, then we partner with different companies that they bring the analytics or and business intelligence to provide them with the necessary insights about the different, let's say, use cases they are building and providing. So we basically we integrate, let's say, your connectivity data with backend systems to their backend systems, and the goal here is to make it easier for them, so they can really do all the rest of their deployments, of the solution deployment, but not really looking at any problems with connectivity, right? So we integrate, let's say, together with our different partners, let's say solution providers in different verticals. So we integrate the different building blocks with them to bring, as I was explaining before, an end-to-end solution. So we also, I mean, what is true is that the platforms need to support, I mean, in this case, our platform supports the need of such companies to generate return on investment and new revenue streams from these connected services and business models. So this is what I was trying to explain before. It's a trend what we call monetization of IoT, right? Is once you get all the data and it's processed by different analytics or cloud platforms, is how these companies can really monetize their services and use cases. Another aspect that is really relevant here is that the billing of the different services associated to connectivity, right? All these billing services needs to be handled in such the same way, for example, that today mobile operators handles billing for millions of subscribers. But of course, the enterprises, they don't have the expertise to do it. So, for example, in the case of a connected car, right, drivers might pay subscriptions to the automaker for the provision of navigation and entertainment services. Or an insurance company might pay it for access to usage and driving reports associated with the vehicles it covers. So all the streams of this of data that they will get and will be analyzed will at some point in time will need to be monetized. And as all these different elements that I explained to you with regards why connectivity, let's say, matters, the enterprises must really look at their use case and business model, because if not, this is one of the reasons, if we come back to our initial question, is one of the reasons why the IoT deployments are still in the infant stage, and there are 3-4 main use cases that are really generating return on investment, while the others are still not doing it. So, I mean, our customers, BICS customers are not experts in connectivity, right? So they really want to focus on the applications, on the products, the services running over their IoT. So, and they need to make sure that this service, this is key. What I'm saying is that this service is consistent across the multiple countries that they need to be present. So they need an international connectivity solution that works, allowing them to focus on their core business. And for those applications where the data and the connectivity is critical, having, let's say, a multi-network coverage ensures as well that the IoT will find optimal connectivity everywhere in the world. When I'm saying multi-network coverage is basically having different options of connectivity in the different countries where the device will be roaming, so they can really guarantee that their service is going to be consistent and reliable. That's the reason, right? Reliability, high quality is crucial for any international enterprise deploying Internet of Things.
Let's take a bit of a detour and talk a little bit about the technologies that are on the horizon. So China right now is pushing NB-IoT very strongly. 5G is planned out for the 2020 Olympics as kind of a soft launch, but it's still, I would say, fairly undefined in terms of what the actual requirements will be. There's a lot of companies that are now looking into launching microsatellites to provide services for specific use cases, maybe lightweight use cases that are in open seas, for example, where currently there's not great coverage or coverage is very expensive. How does BICS assess these solutions on the horizon? How are you reacting to them? Share your thoughts on how you as a business approach planning.
Yeah, I mean, we realize that there are different, IoT use cases. Some of them are going to be covered. I mean, it depends on the different regional deployments. For example, what we see in Asia is that the use of short range and fixed connectivity by the APAC enterprises for IoT is pretty high, I would say. While cellular M2M, let's say that the technology that today BICS is using for 4G deployments is used by nearly 30% of the IoT deployments. So it really depends on the use case and the country. For example, when we look at China today is leading the low power IoT use cases. So the reasons why the technology is being, differently, it will depend from my perspective. It will depend on the country deployment, how the countries are moving or advancing in the IoT deployments. Because if we look at countries where deployments are being pretty fast, are going pretty fast, like for example South Korea, where as well as in China the low power deployments are moving fast, they of course will be much more interested to work on use cases combining low power IoT versus cellular or Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or this the technology, the ZigBee. My perspective here is, again, if you look at national deployments, yes, you will have, let's say, at least 5 different ways that the different devices will work, right? When it comes to international deployments, clearly today the cellular M2M or the 4G network, let's say, it's the most reliable one for international use cases. And this is one simple reason, because the roaming over cellular M2M is there and it's been working since many years, and the coverage is very extensive compared to let's say, new technologies like narrow band IoT or LoRa, for example. So today it's not really possible to, let's say, do cross-border by using low power wireless access. So they need still to rely on cellular connectivity, cellular M2M connectivity. What we also see is there are many device manufacturers that they are already, let's say, working on deployments to make sure that the devices are going to support, right, the different technologies, which is something great. Why? Because, when we face some enterprises, especially on the logistics sector, they have the need to have a combination of different, let's say, connectivity technologies. They want to have a device that works with cellular M2M, some cases, that works with satellite, that works with low power wireless access. So, and it will depend on the location and it will depend on the use case. But the fact is that we see in the market that different service providers are really looking at device manufacturers that they can really combine all these different technologies because they acknowledge that in the near future, it might be that they will require different connectivity methods that today are not available, fully available, let's say, worldwide, but they will be in some countries. And the adaptation and, let's say, adaptability of the device will really enhance the use case. If we look at what's going on in Europe, again, the short range connectivity is the dominant technology used by European enterprises for IoT deployments. But if you look at, this is in general, but if we look at France as country, right? So the French enterprises are very enthusiastic users of low power wireless access. So again, it depends on the region, it depends on the country, it depends on the availability of these different devices covering the different technologies, but also it depends on how the vertical industry will deploy that use case. So the push is coming from, of course, the different players that are dominant in the different technologies, right? So some of them are really pushing for LoRa, some others are pushing for a narrowband. While today, to be honest, I mean, if an enterprise wants to deploy a cross-border IoT use case, they basically have already the availability and the reliability of the cellular end-to-end, which is the 4G network. This is how I see the connectivity playing a role in the IoT projects.
Maybe just one last point on the technology, and then we can move over to looking more in particular at specific use cases or case studies. 5G, do you think 5G is going to be a big game changer in terms of cost or adoption rates? Or are you kind of holding your breath and we'll see what happens in 2020 and on? How are you viewing the impending launch of 5G?
Yeah, but I mean, there are a lot of expectations with regards to 5G, to be honest. And of course, one of the key enablers of the 5G deployments in many, let's say, countries is to enable the IoT use cases, right? Yeah. Because we don't here we are not looking at 5G as a evolution of 4G as a mobile network, right? 5G is not only a mobile network; it's a combination of networks and technologies that is going to enable use cases. Because the use cases need the 5G to really provide a solution. Otherwise, it would be very, very hard with today's technologies to do it. So that's, let's say, the promise of the 5G technology and the 5G deployments. What is true is that from now till the moment that 5G is live, 5G will require not only the deployment of the 5G network as such, which is huge, right? From the investment perspective, from the mobile perspective, from all the telco perspective, it will require a huge investment and a lot of support from the governments locally. But besides that, 5G won't be, let's say, working as a standalone network. It will require the contribution of all the different stakeholders in the chain. It will require the contribution of the device manufacturers, that they will require to make sure that all the different devices will be, let's say, working with multiple technologies. It will require the disintermediation of the different networks, because now the technology, the IoT technology over 5G will require that there is a lot much more exchange of data and information towards different entities, not only the mobile operators or carriers, but also the cloud platforms and the service providers as such. So they will require to decentralize, let's say, the different data centers that today are handling all the data streams when it comes to IoT, right? So they really can make things smarter, right? So they really can make things more intelligent to really solve the needs of some specific use cases. So for me, 5G is really promising, but it will require the contribution of all of the different stakeholders. And to be honest, I think as long as the different use cases over 5G are not clear enough, or they are not clearly showing returns, it's going to be even harder. Because even today, as I was explaining, we see that we are in an infant stage with the current deployments. 5G deployments will require much defined use cases, right? Where the interoperability of the different technologies must be required.
Carlos, so thanks so much for walking us through the technology roadmap.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at IoT ONE HQ and to check out our database of case studies on IoT1.com. If you have unique insight or a project deployment story to share, we'd love to feature you on a future edition. Write us at eric.walenza@iot1.com.